He was the most dominant player of the modern era. Hopefully the NBA won't be mad at me saying this. Now it's truly an international game.
Hello, everyone. I'm really excited about this. So I grew up in New York. I was a Knicks fan, but if there was one other team that I rooted for, it was the Chicago Bulls. So excited to have BJ Armstrong there. BJ, can you talk about early on how you started and how you got to the NBA?
Oh, that's a big question. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here and speaking with so many wonderful people. It's like anything in life. As a young kid, I was a great admirer of sports. I grew up in the city of Detroit, Michigan. I still am to this day a Detroit Pistons fan. For many years playing in Chicago, our nemesis, if you will, were the Detroit Pistons. And the Detroit, I was probably the only player where my whole family rooted against me during all those times when we played against the Detroit Pistons. But I grew up in Detroit, had a vision that someday, I just had a dream like so many kids, to play sports. My family, my mom and my dad always emphasized go to school, sure, you're going to make it. However, they never deterred me from chasing my dreams, and lo and behold, I was able to make it. Fortunate enough to play professionally for 11 years, played with some wonderful players. I like to say that, Michael played with me. I know I played with Michael Jordan, but had some great, some of my greatest, most cherished friendships and relationships have come through sports and the things that you earn by participating in sports. So I was able to make it and then continue to transition, continue to always work in sports, even after my playing career. So, but it was great. That was kind of my way, my entryway to make it. I didn't know if I would ever make it, but I was very fortunate enough to play and play for quite some time.
How many people watched The Last Dance? They were great. Right. So how was it to play with Michael Jordan?
How was it like? Okay, that's a good question. First time I've heard that question. Really I can still remember my first day. I had met Michael years before, just playing pickup games, so forth and so on. But I can still remember my first day of entering into the practice facility. And before gray hair and all that, I remember my first day, I went into practice and they wouldn't let me in practice, but they said, hey kid, no kids allowed into the NBA practice. So that was my first day of practice for the Chicago Bulls as I got into the NBA. I wish I would have known that Michael was really Michael. He hadn't won yet. He was a guy who was wearing long shorts, which was a weird thing to all of us. He wore longer shorts than the rest of the players. He was a phenomenal competitor, as we all know. But I think the greatest thing you could say, he was a phenomenal teammate. He was a great teammate, and I've been able to maintain that relationship for many, many years afterwards, right? And, it's always funny when I hear about, man, what was Michael like? To us, he's just MJ, and he calls, he checks in, says hello, and then we move on. And it's always weird when I see my kids wearing Jordans, because we didn't wear them when they were here, but now they're like, popular thing. And I always make it fun. I was like, did you know, really? He's like, none of us did. We never wore Jordans. So it's like one of those things you never know. But he was a phenomenal teammate. And I really wish after that documentary came out that people could have actually seen him practice. Because the best of them we didn't really see. You saw the games and you saw the highlights and all of those things. But when you see someone and behind the curtain, they're actually better than advertised, that's what we didn't see. And he was really that good. But more importantly, he put in the work, right? He didn't cheat the game. That's the one thing that you can't express, which you'll be like, yeah, whatever. But he was really that good. He was just, he had a gift and he perfected that gift and became a master at his craft. But, honestly, none of us knew that he was going to go on to be the greatest. We just knew it was a guy that he would jump high and he had his tongue out and we didn't know what was going on. And we couldn't beat the Detroit Pistons, but we figured it out along the way. And he was obviously the reason why we did it. But he was a phenomenal teammate, phenomenal person. I really wish everyone could have got a chance to see someone perfect their craft because he had to work for it. It wasn't given to him. He wasn't the best player we came in the NBA. He worked for it. He earned it. And to watch him go through that journey was an incredible thing.
What was it like when you guys won the first championship? Because I remember the Detroit Pistons. We actually have someone here from Detroit.
Bad boys. Brother Rice. Yeah, Brother Rice. That's right.
That's right. It took a while to get over that hump. So, here, even in the audience, a lot of here people are entrepreneurs. They work hard. It takes a while to put it there. So, what loves you to relate to that, talk about that. What do you remember the most about it?
Well, the thing that I remember most was we had an obstacle that we had to overcome. And you look around, and at that time, the thing that I remember most about before winning the championship was the Detroit Pistons was hands down, they were the best team in the NBA. It wasn't like you couldn't even talk yourself out of it. You couldn't say, well, we didn't play well tonight. No, Bill Laimbeer and these guys, they were beating us up and there's nothing we could do about it. They were physically better than us. Mentally, they were better than us. But if it was one thing that we could hold our hat on, is we knew we had the best player, but they had the best team. And that was fascinating because that was the first time in my career, that was the first time in everyone that was in that locker room who lost to the Detroit Pistons where we had to admit to ourselves that they were a better team than we were. Okay, that's very hard to admit as a professional athlete. You got to talk yourself into it. Well, I just didn't make shots. If we didn't make shots tonight, we would have won the game. Oh, well, they just played better. No, Isaiah Thomas was better than me. I don't care what I did. He was better than me. Dennis Rodman was better than whoever else was on our team. And they were just a better team. What was it like for us? We finally came to the conclusion that if we were going to do it, we were stronger together than we were individually. And that was the biggest moment. I remember when we lost. I can still remember it to this day. My greatest probably transformation as an NBA player was losing to the Detroit Pistons in Game 7 because we all had to look at each other and face this dilemma. Either all of us are going to get traded or we're going to figure out how to beat this team. And the day that we lost, when the conference finals, everyone came to practice the next day to prepare for the next year. And the rest is history. And it wasn't a coach's. It wasn't we said anything to each other. It was just everyone made an individual decision to participate in what we're going to do. And we're going to lose together. Let's lose together. And sometimes you'll have a thought. You'll come together as a group for whatever the reason may be. And that happened for us in defeat. And that was the strongest moment probably for that organization, for those group of people, because we knew what losing felt like, right? If there's any game I could share in business, don't be afraid to fail, because in the failure is where you find all your answers. And in that moment, in that locker room, none of us told each other to come tomorrow to practice. None of us even said anything, but we all did it. And then, as they say, the rest is history. So it's kind of one of those moments that who I wanted to become, I actually found it when I lost. We found it when we lost. And because we valued winning so much in our defeat, we played with that sense of urgency. And I think the best player in the game, probably that's where he grew. And he became, he was a monster. If he was up, he weren't going to be. But we all learned that lesson in defeat. So if there's anything I can share is in your failures, right? Learn who you really are and you find what it's all about. And from that moment, in that loss, that's where I really found it. That's where we found it.
Can you talk about your experience with Phil Jackson? Like, what did you learn? He brought 3 championships here to the Lakers. What was it like? What was that experience?
Wow, Phil was interesting because he did things in a non-traditional way. So, for instance, we would go to practice. We're in New York. We have a big game. We're playing the Knicks. We're down 0-2. Our best player is shooting about 25 or 30% from the field. We're going to Madison Square Garden, and all of a sudden we start heading out to go on a tour, right, to see the Statue of Liberty. And Phil thought, well, why do what everyone is going to think you should do? Let's do something out of the box. And I remember we got criticized so much because Phil, our leader, blew off practice. But he blew it off in a way that he thought that we just needed to clear our minds as we enter into this battle. And so he would do things instead of having practice. Hey, let's read a book, and then let's talk about the book tomorrow. And you're like, where's this guy from? Like, what's he doing? How's this helping us? We're playing the Lakers at the NBA Finals, and we're having a film session. Well, all right, everyone's in there, and he turns on the Wizard of Oz. So we had to watch the Wizard of Oz, and he's asking like, well, who has courage in here? And you're like, what is this, And then we go on to win. So I said something to work. He was just unique that way. I think it was just breaking up the monotony, keeping everyone on their toes. And he had his own way of allowing you to be you in the school. And it was different, but it worked for us. We had a very interesting group, very laid back. And as you all know here, it's hard to, you're working with a lot of people. And he would always get up in front of the room. He was like, "Hey, I'm getting 12 different speeches here right now." And so he understood leadership. He allowed us to be ourselves. Some of us were serious. Some of us were like to joke. Some of us like to listen to music before the game. And he allowed us to participate in our own way and take our own claim of the team and of the group. So, but he was a different character for sure. The Zen master, that's for real. He's truly a unique individual, but it works. And if there's anything I can say about him, is he has leadership qualities that are essential to the success of any group or any successful organization. So I'm not saying it's the best way for every group, but it worked for that group. And he came here to LA. It obviously worked for them as well.
What was it like when I think it was Charlotte Hornets? You went to the Charlotte Hornets, and I think you were talking a little trash or something like that. And take a Can you recall that? Tell us about that. Yeah.
Well, what he's referring to is, there was kind of an unwritten thing. You didn't talk trash to the best players. Well, what's the point of playing if you're not going to challenge the best? I didn't. As a kid, I had a dream of playing against the best players. That was my dream. And playing with Michael, I kind of knew how to attack them. I knew how to do certain things. Now, that may work for one game, which it did. And I felt pretty good about that one game. And I learned what everyone else learned. However, I remember after the series, because they beat us that series, I remember Michael coming over and saying, "You know what? I respect that." And I needed that. So competition is why you play, and I learned that from him, to be honest with you. He would always say, "Hey, if you're going to show up, show up. If you're going to do it, do it. I can always live with a loss, but I can't live without trying." So yes, I knew what I was doing. He knew what I was doing, and he was better. He was supposed to do it. But however, it would have been a great story if I could sit up here and say that I beat him, and I went for it. But I talked a little trash, and that's how it goes. And if you're gonna compete, you got to compete, and you got to live with the results. So I learned that from all those years of winning. You're gonna be on both sides if you're gonna compete. You're gonna win some, you're gonna lose some, but you got to try. So I laid it out there. I lost that one, but for one game though, I did win. No one talks about that anymore.
What advice would you give a rookie BJ Armstrong?
Wow. Well, the biggest thing is when you're coming in as a rookie in the NBA or anywhere, I think coming in with humility and being humble is probably the greatest lesson that you can learn. And I was very fortunate that I had amazing veterans. What would I give myself? Listen way more than you talk. Like, just listen, absorb, try to look around and figure out what's successful, why are other people successful, and then figure out your way. I had Bill Cartwright, John Paxson. I had some incredible veterans, and I was fortunate that way, that I had people who were already professionals in the business. There was this young player named Scottie Pippen, for instance. Michael Jordan was Michael Jordan. However, the veteran players were the guys where I got lucky, and I was incredibly just in the right place at the right time. My first head coach, my introduction to the NBA was a Hall of Fame coach named Phil Jackson, and my first year was his first year. So you got to get lucky along your journey. But, if there's one thing that I would tell my younger self, it's just be humble and approach every day with humility. Learn as much as you can. Learn what works, what doesn't work, and then try to apply it to what your skill set is, what you can do, and figure out who you are. And I was fortunate to come into a situation like the Chicago Bulls and come in with, every time I think about it, my running mate was Michael Jordan, so I couldn't mess that up too bad. And then I had a Hall of Fame coach, Phil Jackson. So I was lucky, but just being humble enough to accept what I do and what I didn't know. I think that takes experience. You got to commit to that. I was fortunate in that way.
How do you think about the game today compared to when you were playing? A lot of people are complaining about too many three-pointers. We were great three-pointers, so maybe you loved it now, but just curious about that.
Well, the game is different. It's like anything in life, anything in the business. Over time, it continues to change and evolve. So us old guys now, myself, we complain about, oh, these guys jack up a lot of threes. These gotta, but that's not the case. The truth of the matter is, when you look at the game, it's hard for me. So I apologize for saying this. It's hard for me to look at the game as a fan because my eye is trained to look at it and to figure out how to win the game. So when I go to the game with my kids, I'm just watching the strategy of the game, and then I have to remind myself, oh, if your kids, my wife was like, talk, and I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, like man, that was a play I'd never seen before, or something will happen. The game now, the athletes, hopefully the NBA won't be mad at me saying this. The court is too small for the players now. You have too many 7-footers on the floor. Okay. And when you have this many big guys on the floor, you have to have the space to operate. Steph Curry, great players always figure out this one thing. They always figure out where no one else is operating. So in our generation, the big guys were in the post, right? So that was Wilt Chamberlain, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, all those guys, they played from the post. The small guys were out on the perimeter, but they didn't do anything other than pass it to the guys in the post. And then they came along this guy named Michael Jordan who figured out how to play in the mid-range where no one was at. Okay, so that was like one of those genius moments. Wow, wait a minute, here's a guy shooting in the mid-range. No one had done that before. And then along came this guy, Steph Curry, who said, well, people are in the mid-range, people are in the post. I'm going to go out here past the three-point line where no one's hanging out. And he figured that out. And then everyone was like, 3 is worth more than 2. That's really what happened, right? The problem is they're not shooting at the percentage that Steph Curry is. Now, if you're shooting 45% and I'm shooting at 50%, and I make 4 out of 10, that's what, 12 points. And then I make 5 out of 10, that's, they're at 10 points. So you would win. But no one's shooting like Steph Curry or Klay Thompson. That's the problem. However, that's not going to stop everyone from trying. So Steph Curry kind of figured out where no one else was operating, took advantage of that, in essence, kind of affected the game. Now, I don't know if he intentionally did it, but he did it, right? It's kind of like those things. You just keep trying, and then all of a sudden, oh, wow, look where I found. So I like the game. I like where it's at. However, if you're going to be great at anything, you got to go to your strengths. And the only thing that I'm concerned about watching the game, there's only one Steph Curry, but everyone's shooting as if they are Steph Curry. Now, I don't know if that's right or wrong, but Steph Curry he's an anomaly. There's always an anomaly. Wembanyama, for instance, he's an anomaly. Okay, there's players that come around. LeBron James, for instance, there's always things that come around you can't explain, but Steph Curry is an anomaly. Like, for him to shoot at this level, we've never seen it before. But that doesn't mean that everyone else should be shooting like him. And that's the only thing that bothers me. We've taken now quantity over quality. The main thing about becoming a good shooter in basketball is shooting high quality shots. And that's the only thing that I always, when I talk to Michael and these guys, I always ask them, I go, what would you have done if I just looked you off and just shot a 3? You were like, I would have traded you. So that's why we didn't do it.
So a few weeks ago, there was a shots heard around the world being this is LA, and you talk about strategy. The Lakers traded, got Luka for Anthony Davis.
Right.
I'd love your opinion on that. And I know there's a lot of Laker fans there happy if you're from Dallas.
Yeah. Well, trades are a part of the deal, right? Very rarely will you go through your career and not be traded or play on just one team. So let's start there. They traded him for whatever the reason may be, talking about the Dallas Mavericks. And one thing I can say, working in the NBA as an assistant general manager for 6 years, you know what you know and you know what you don't know. And one of the things as an executive, you have to follow this principle. You have to know your team better than anyone else. So they know something that the rest of us don't know. I don't know what that is. All I can tell you is what I see. I see a guy who he's been first team All-NBA for the last 5 years. He looks like a pretty good player. However, it's with that humility that I knew then that I know something about my team and my organization that the rest of the world doesn't know. And whatever that may be, we will find out over time, but it's going to take us time to do it. I can't say what it is because I don't know what it is. But I will say this, these guys are really good at what they do. Okay, these executives, these coaches, they're really good. Luka's a phenomenal player. And Anthony Davis is a phenomenal player. But I do think it's probably a trade as I look at it from the outside. It's a win-win for everyone. I think the Dallas Mavericks will be really good if they're healthy. And I think Luca probably needed a move, a trade. And I think the Lakers and their organization will benefit from it as well. So in the end, I think it's probably a win-win, provided everyone is healthy. Right. Luca is just getting back. Anthony Davis is now injured. But I think it has a chance to be a trade that we look back and say both teams will probably benefit from this.
I want to open it up to the crowd here because this is amazing.
I got a bunch of questions. So if you guys don't have one, I'm going to lob one in.
Steve.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you talk about how the game is played today and the spacing because of the big men. But at least my generation, growing up, watching you play, watching the Detroit Pistons and everybody being my Knicks, the game was much more physical back then. And what are your thoughts about that? Do you enjoy the fact that, or did you enjoy the physical back then? Or do you like the fact that, today you don't get mugged when you go down the, down the thing?
Well, as one of the smaller guys, I never enjoyed playing that style of play. Okay, I'm going to say that. However, there's the basketball business, what we're talking about now, and then there's the business of basketball. At one point, 99% of all the players were from America. Now it's truly an international game. And that's the business of basketball that we must take into consideration. Currently now, when we look at the NBA game, a quarter of the players are international players, foreign-born. And that's only going to rise because the continent of Africa is up next, okay? They have 1 billion people on the continent, and it's just a matter of time before you start seeing more and more Akeem Olajuwons, Joel Embiid's, Giannis's, Wembanyama. It's going to happen, okay? So that's just the infrastructure of getting it where it needs to be. The game had to change because the game was it was too physical of a game. Someone was going to really get hurt. It was just too physical. But now you're looking at the game, you're going, what's going on now? Now the guys don't want to play. So it's kind of like it went from one extreme to the other. You would hope that at some point it'll figure itself out where it'll get where it's supposed to get to. And that's a big hope. But truthfully speaking, some of the fouls some of them I committed. Some of them were committed against me. Someone was going to get hurt because there was a rule where no one got a layup with your Knicks, okay? That was one game that you knew. The referees were like, hey, don't go in there, BJ. You're going to get hurt. I mean, Charles Oakley and the late Anthony Mason and those guys that was the rule. And we had the same rule. So you would hope that it figures itself out where they can play a brand of basketball that we can see that people mean business. They're not just hugging it out all the time, You want to see a little blood every now and then, But you got to clean the game up. And the international players are coming in, and there's going to be more of them. So I just think it's for the NBA now they're in a tough spot. They're trying to find the balance of where it could be. When you watch FIBA, for instance, which is European game, it's more physical now than the NBA game. And that's why you're seeing in the Olympics, they're getting closer and closer, okay? Because it's a much more physical game than our game. But yeah, I think it'll figure itself out in some years. I think it's going to take some years to do it because the players aren't being taught how to play physically, or you don't see post-up players. You don't see Patrick Ewing, for instance, in those guys. But I think it'll come back.
As you think about both your time as a player and as an exec, as you think about the number of games in a season, you're going to lose a fair number of them. Mentally, how do you get both emotional about that game and then move on? Like, did you have something you used, and was it different as a player versus an exec to deal with the length of the season and the emotions?
Yeah, that's a great question. If it's one thing that I learned early in my career is there's really no preparation for an 82-game schedule, right? I probably played 80 games or 90 games max in my 4 years in college, right? And then all of a sudden you're playing 82 games plus preseason plus the playoffs, and I was playing over 100 games a year. The one thing that I learned is that I had to have a short memory. Like, I didn't dwell on anything. I just moved on to the next one. And I learned after about 30 or 40 games that I learned how to become present in everything that I did. I never dwelled on the game tomorrow, and I never dwelled on the last play. If I made a shot, I moved on. If I missed a shot, I moved on. And it sounds cliche, but you just take it one day at a time because of the length of the season. There's no way that I could be in my best for 82 games. But I could try to win every game. And my job was to figure out how to do it. So Some nights we played 4 games in 5 nights. My job was to slow the game down to a snail's pace so that we can win the game at the end. If we were off for 3 or 4 days, hey, the Bulls were running and jumping and throwing alley-oops, and that guy was going there, his tongue was out, and all was good. Everyone was like, oh, man, this is a great game. So every game provided a different challenge, and I had to be present mentally every single day. And as much as we talk about physically trained, to answer your question, mentally, I had to learn how to deal with whatever I was dealing with. If I wasn't feeling good that night, I had to play that way. But I couldn't sit out because I wasn't feeling well. I had to figure out how to get it done regardless. So mentally training yourself to be present was probably the most difficult thing because, as a kid, you're always, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll get it done later. As an NBA player, you can't do that because it's just too many games and your body is beat up. Mentally, you're beat up. Sometimes you're dealing with things off the court. Life comes in the way every now and then. And so you just learn how to do it and be present for that 48 minutes, and then you move on.
So I got a 2-part question for you, if I may. I have to ask you about Scottie Pippen.
Okay.
And then the second part of that is you talked about how Michael kind of transitioned in the game, found his spot, and then you briefly talked about Stephen Curry. Can you also comment about Kobe Bryant and LeBron James? How do they find those areas? So 2-part question for you.
Okay, so which part of you want to start with Scottie
Or
first?
just do Scottie first.
All right, what do we want to know about Scottie? Scottie is Scottie. Scottie, sometimes, when you come in to this league, you come in with expectations. And Scottie is one of these players that came in from Central Arkansas, and probably with the exception of the late Jerry Krause who drafted him, I hadn't heard anyone that said this is going to be the next or a top 50 greatest player of all time. Okay, that's the first thing. To Scottie's credit, Scottie became one of the greatest players of all time. He did. He was, when I first got there, he was kind of finding his way. He was a young kid, like we all were. And all of a sudden, before you do it, he was like, he's scoring 20 points. You go, okay, good for him. And then, he had 20 for that week. All right, maybe it was a good matchup. And all of a sudden, you start saying, wow, he could be. Scottie was just a unique talent. And when I say unique, he could do things that you just couldn't teach, right? He could defend, he could rebound and push the ball out, he could pass the ball, and he was just a unique talent that just got better and better and better. To where he evolved to where he was one of the greatest players of all time, of his generation. There's no doubt about it. He could play in any generation what he did. Lately he's gotten media coverage for other things. That's another discussion. But as a player, he was great. As a teammate, he was phenomenal because he was a facilitator. Like, it was like one of those guys that did things, like he would score 20 points and he never had to play. And he would just do things that you just couldn't teach. So that's where Scottie was at, and he was a phenomenal teammate. You want to talk about Kobe and LeBron? Well, let's start with LeBron first because he's still active. He's playing. I had the pleasure of seeing LeBron James play as a freshman in high school. Okay, so I've seen this young man grow from a freshman in high school, and literally he was the same size then as he is right now. Okay, that was, when you say you get a gift, you have a gift. He has what in sports or in business you would call an unfair advantage. He has had a physical advantage along this journey. He was 6'8", 240. He's 260 or something now, but he was 6'8", 240 or 6'9", 240 in high school as a freshman in high school. Okay, that's how. So I've seen this young man go through the entire process at I think it was St. Vincent, somewhere in Akron, Ohio. LeBron is an incredible athlete. First of all, his longevity speaks for itself. What he's been able to do, how he's played the game, his approach to the game, but more importantly, how he's been able to do this at a level for such a length of time. That's probably been his legacy, if you will, for him to be able to, I think he's in year 22, and for him to be able to do this and play at this level at 40, it's just incredible to watch. All right. When you start talking about comparing, okay, that's another conversation. But what he's been able to do, wow. And to watch him do it for so long, you got to say, wow. Kobe.
So who do you think is better? That's the GOAT.
Well, okay, that's the GOAT. I don't want to get technical again because it's hard for me. These are fun arguments, right? Because my kids are like, oh, Dad, you don't know what you're talking about. I was like, yeah, I kind of knew the guy a little bit. I got a little something. My youngest is like, Dad, did you really play? He's like 9. He's like, did you really? Was that really you? I don't know if that's really you. Allegedly, that's a new word. So technically speaking, there's 3 things going on, right? And I don't want to bore you, but technically speaking, there's 3 things going on when you start evaluating who's the greatest, right? One, which is the obvious, your ability to dominate on the offensive end. Okay, so you can look at Michael, you look at LeBron, and you look at Kobe, who dominate, right? Meaning you can score when you need to do it, not because you have to do it when you need to do it. Look at those 3. You can argue that maybe Kobe is right there. I don't think LeBron is right there, but those other 2, okay, that's the first. Then who can dominate with rebounding at their position? Okay, so you can say maybe LeBron, can say Michael, whatever it is, because they both play different positions. One's a small forward, one's a 2 guard. Okay, but then the X factors of all of this is who was the most dominant defensive player. Okay, because we know that defense translates directly to winning. How do we know that? Because the most championships were won by the best defensive player probably of all time, which was Bill Russell. So offensively, we know that Will Chamberlain, if you look at just stats, he was probably and arguably the greatest athlete to come through here, right? The guy played in every minute of every game plus overtime for a year, and he did it in converse commas. Right? So when you look at it technically, you're going, this guy averaged like 50 points and 25 rebounds for an entire year and never missed an entire minute of a game. So load management had no idea of who Wilt Chamberlain. Okay, so we know what dominance looks like, but we also know that winning is the why you play. And when you add all of that up, then Jordan is the most complete out of all of them. He's the most complete. He's the most dominant, right? He's the most dominant on the defensive end. So he gets all the credit offensively for what he did. But all of the people who played against him and the coach against them and who watched them, he was the most dominant player of the modern era. Okay, that's why he's held at the highest regard. Offensively, longevity, he dominated his era. He dominated everyone from the Pistons, Akeem Olajuwon, anyone that came to that era. He didn't beat them, he dominated them. Okay, so we know his impact and what that is. And now that's a measuring stick for everyone else. So Kobe Bryant is right there. LeBron is right there. But he is hands down technically. He's just the most dominant player of what he was able to achieve because of, that one factor, which is the X factor, which he could dominate you on the defensive end. He didn't have to score. It made it impossible to beat him because he could score, but he could dominate the game just on the defensive end.
One last question. One more question.
This is history in the making right here. Go for it.
Yeah, BJ. I wasn't a Bulls fan, but I was a BJ fan.
Oh, man.
It's like, tell us a little what's going on or what you think's can happen in Europe. You're hearing NBA, you're hearing Maverick, you're seeing the whole EuroLeague. I think it's just should be blowing up. But give us your take, inside scoop.
All right. That's a big question. And it's a great question, by the way, because it's truly now an international game. The NBA recognizes it. Europe, I just got back from Europe here about a month ago. They recognize it. And for all of us here in this room, so NBA Europe is going to happen. All right. The NBA is going to do business with about 13 or 14 EuroLeague teams in Europe, right? Milan, London, Barcelona, Real Madrid, and they're going to have an NBA Europe division. Now, the reason that's important is because a quarter of the players currently now are international players. And this is the big idea. For about the last 6 or 7 years now, the best players in the NBA are all foreign born. And the best players who've won the players who have won the MVP in the NBA have all been foreign born players. Their developmental system is far superior than ours now. This is the first time that this has happened. And the reason it's happening is because their coaches now have surpassed our coaches at the youth level. Okay, and that's a big idea because if we want better students, we have to give them better teachers. They have far superior teachers now than what we have here. We don't have here in America anymore, we don't have a developmental system. That system has always relied on what we call the NCAA. It no longer exists. So now we're bypassing a system to develop the players. We haven't developed a U.S. player since LeBron James, who's really a star. All of our players and our star players now are mid-major players. Mid-majors means Steph Curry went to Davidson, Kawhi Leonard, Damian Lillard, Ja Morant. So the best players now, they're in the NBA, are all coming from the mid-majors, and they're not coming from the blue blood schools anymore. Okay, so that's what's happening. So we don't have a way to develop a star player. Kobe Bryant grew up in Europe. So the NBA is transitioning to figure out how to develop a player because we don't have a way right now. So Jokic is 3-time MVP, Giannis 2-time MVP, Joel Embiid, and then probably Shea Alexander this year. And we know Wembanyama is going to be the next best player for the next 10 years or more. So right now, we don't have a way here in America to develop a player. And that's the real issue. So of course they're going to go to Europe because they have a system that clearly works. And our system, which is in college, no longer exists, right? That's been taken out by NIL. And then now we're relying on AAU. So that's the real issue. That's why NBA Europe is of great importance because they have to find a way to feed their system. And right now, today, that's the best way, that's the best plan that they have.
So, folks, what a great privilege to have you here with us. Thank you so much.